Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, although I never thought I would actually do it, I'm going to do a Does That Make Sense analysis, not a long one, but does that make sense analysis of Bella's last words, scratch that, walk. So what I want us to do is to think logically and sensibly and authentically about what we are talking about here. You know, if you're seriously going to feel this as a scenario, then don't just have it exist on its own in a vacuum. Connect it to the rest of the story. And then the question is, can you connect it to the rest of the story? Not only can you connect it to the rest of the story, can you connect the scenario to the people, to the circumstances, to the situation? So before we get started on this episode, if you haven't subscribed, please do. You can subscribe by clicking the icon on the bottom right of the screen. Like, share, leave a comment. And let's get started. So if you think about the story around Bella, it is actually it started on the driveway. So it sort of started, I guess, December 2018, January 2019, Bella sort of came back to life and she was apparently running around the driveway. Do you remember that? So that was kind of the beginning of Bella's resurrection in the whole Chris Watts narrative. So you saw a shadow and that meant Bella was alive and Bella was running around on the driveway. And you might say, well, it was one of the children. The reason that we would suspect it was Bella was because of the district attorney's words, Bella fought back. Remember that? And so that is already indicative that it was likely to be Bella. Does that make sense? So that is the first phase of this sort of tripartite narrative, right? Is that Bella sort of comes to life on the driveway. You never see her, but she's apparently sort of running up and down. So that's the first phase. The second phase is what happens, what is narrated, what is exposed, what is kind of realized in the second confession, where Chris Watts talks about driving to the well site and his children are in the backseat of the truck and nothing much happens. They don't really talk to him. It's a 45-minute trip and not much is said. He talks about them dozing off. But in this scenario, it is now from being beside the truck on the driveway to inside the truck, and now the truck is moving from A to B, from 2825 Saratoga Trail to the well site, okay? And the Lifetime movie kind of dramatized this moment quite dramatically. It kind of showed like a red light over Chris Watts' face and the children kind of in limbo in the back. They don't really do much, they don't really say much, nothing much happens. And for me personally, I found it quite hard to believe that their mother was in that situation, lifeless, and that didn't concern them, it didn't bother them, and these did seem like children that were quick to become emotional. If you look at that Christmas video, the video where they're supposed to meet Santa Claus, they are both screaming and in tears because it's something that they're not used to. They actually did the same thing with the Easter Bunny. There are photos of them with the Easter Bunny, and because it's out of the ordinary for them, they're screaming. What we also know with the Watts children is when Chris went on his date on Saturday night, he kind of had to sneak out the house without the children seeing him, because if they did see him, there could have been a kind of an attachment, abandonment sort of thing, where they may have cried, in that sense. And he's also spoken about, he doesn't like to, or I think him and Shanann didn't like to FaceTime when she was away, because that could bring about a cry fest. Those were his words, a cry fest. And so you kind of get the sense that they're quite easily distressed, don't you? That's the impression I get, that they can quite easily be distressed. Shanann also didn't like the children woken up in the morning. Now that could be Shanann's just, wanting to have things the way that she wanted them, but maybe it's also to prevent the onset of that distress sooner than later, if she could possibly avoid it. So now we've got this narrative that has gone from the driveway to the inside of the truck, and of course the Lifetime movie didn't take it any further than that. The Lifetime movie doesn't really show the truck arriving at the well site or anything like that. None of that part is actually dramatized or shown. It's kind of left to the imagination. And then there is now the third element, which has just happened, I guess, now, which is now the story that Bella has walked up they call it the catwalk, but it's just kind of that metal walkway. It's quite a narrow metal staircase alongside the fracking tanks, right? It's kind of a spidery metal thing, the kind of thing that you might find on playgrounds and slides, that kind of structure, except alongside this oil infrastructure. And so the story is that in this story now, Bella actually freely, voluntarily, not under duress, not under anyone's control, not with the arm twisted, goes up the walkway. Right? That's the story. So now we've kind of seen her go from the driveway in one story to inside the truck in the next story to the walkway in this final story, right? And what I'm going to now just do is just ask you to imagine, I'm sure everyone has imagined, oh, this is terrible, she walked to her death. It's horrible, and people have gotten very upset about it. But what I want you to do is put on your True Crime Rocket Science cap and fire up your imagination and put some fuel into your brain and just kind of fly a little bit above the well site and look down on it and think about what we're talking about here. Okay? So what we're talking about is a scenario where Watts is now, this is in the latest scenario, this is in this final scenario, and that scenario is suggesting that Bella was actually murdered on this walkway. In other words, in plain sight, right? In other words, on a platform high above the ground, which has line of sight that goes on for miles, but never mind that. But you can see it from a long distance away, and there's no shielding, so there are no walls, there's nothing that is going to interrupt a field of view. And so in this situation, are you telling me that Watts would commit a murder in broad daylight, in the open air, with his colleagues apparently, possibly, imminently arriving? And so he's going to do that there. Now, this is from the perspective of, regardless of how Bella felt about things, regardless of her personality, regardless of what she was perceiving, this is just Chris Watts doing his thing. And there's sort of no talk about, okay, so did he put Cece in the one tank first? Now, bear in mind, the tank that Cece was found in was the tank closest to the ladder. So in other words, as you reach the top of the ladder, that hatch, that tank, is where Cece was put in. And that suggests that Bella was put in after Cece was put in. So you're telling me Watts would put Cece in the tank and Bella would be standing around there, absolutely kind of volunteering to be there? Would you? If you'd seen someone just murder someone else, and there was like miles of open terrain and not a weapon in sight, and there's a body count of 2 already, and you the third person, would you just sort of stand around and like, what's sort of going on here? Do you think you would make the effort to try to escape? I would. And what this story is kind of conjuring is a scenario where Bella doesn't have her own personality. Bella isn't very smart. Bella isn't capable of running around like she was on that Christmas day, trying to escape the camera, screaming and all that kind of thing. That's another thing, is the screaming. You would expect a child in a situation like that to scream. And wouldn't that be of concern to you if you're out in the open on kind of a farmland? Bear in mind it's very early in the morning, and a scream like that you could probably hear some distance, and there could be all sorts of witnesses wandering around, farm hands, oil workers at neighboring sites. There's also a Conoco gas station that's not that far from that location. And so really you would want to take that risk. So as far as I'm concerned, if you connect what we're talking about to the criminal aspect of it, so in other words, what you're trying to do is hide evidence away in these oil tanks. In other words, you're actually trying to completely destroy evidence and permanently, and hide it from view permanently. You're trying to make it vanish permanently, right? If that is your psychology, so the idea is that you are trying to conceal from sight forever and ever, then why on earth would what you do leading up to that moment be visible? Why what you're doing leading up to that moment be sort of kind of reckless? In other words, this effort to hide something away, this effort to conceal, this effort to destroy evidence, this effort to cover over, why is it preceded by this sort of, oh, well, it doesn't really matter if people can see you on the driveway, it doesn't really matter if people can see you in the truck, it doesn't matter if people can see you at the work site, it doesn't matter if people can see you on the ladder. So can you see that there's a dissonance? They don't really match up, right? So there's a dissonance in terms of the crime and the crime scene, and then there's also a dissonance in terms of the way a person in the situation would behave. So if you imagine Bella is on the driveway and she gets into the truck and her mother is deceased and there's the smell of excrement and all that kind of thing, and she hasn't seen her mother all weekend. She's missed her mother. And now there's sort of this situation of, well, your mother's right here. Well, she's not moving. She's not talking. Are you telling me that is not going to distress a child in that situation? And, it's a situation where in this story, Bella is in the back seat and Chris Watts can't control her. He can't comfort her. He can't soothe her. She's simply in the back, and he also can't stop her from lifting up kind of a black plastic bag or the bed sheet. And are you also telling me that a child of 4, almost 5 years old, wouldn't lift the sheet to see her mother, to see her mother's face, to see what is going on? And when she did see her mother's face, wouldn't it cause her distress if she did? And so I don't think it's very likely that she wouldn't do that. And the other thing then is, what about her sister? If her sister was alive or if her sister was not alive, I think there would be distress either way. So in other words, if her sister was alive and they're both in a situation that's unfamiliar to them, first of all, being in the truck was something that they weren't used to being in, and they weren't used to being in the truck in the location they were in, and they weren't used to being in the truck without car seats. So the whole situation was very foreign and very unfriendly as far as they were concerned, if they were in that situation. So why wouldn't there be like the sense of distress? Now, someone who wants to commit a murder is hyper vigilant in terms of what are other people going to think, what are other people going to see, How can I control outcomes? How can I control the narrative? How can I have control over this whole thing? So why on earth, in a situation like that, where you want control, would you allow a random feature such as someone alive who can run around, shout, do random things that you don't have control over, because you don't have that much control over a child, in a open space? It's not just the open space of the well site, but it's also getting to that open space. So you have that whole 45-minute exposure where people could see something inside the car. Why would you want to put yourself in that situation? And now bear in mind, even if Chris Watts didn't have murder on his mind, even if he was just going on a joyride with his kids to the well site, I think that was potentially a fireable offence, is taking his kids not only in his work truck, but to a well site like that with his children. Something like that, he could potentially lose his job, because that is not the truck and the well site is for authorized personnel only. And there is a very real risk at a well site that things can explode, things can, if there's something that is random, some kind of reckless random event, like someone lighting a cigarette or whatever, can cause serious problems. And that is why that's why the companies don't want the situation. So why the heck would you want to have a situation like that right up until the last minute? I mean, does it make sense? If we now go back to the top of this ladder and you say now, okay, so this is where this incident happened, are you telling me that Watts just kind of approached his daughter, she knew what was going to happen, she must have screamed at him, and then, this is in this fictional scenario, and then he approaches her? Why wouldn't she kind of bite him, kick him, why wouldn't her clothes be torn? Why would he not have any kinds of bruises on him? And bear in mind, even though she's a small little girl, if you know what's about to happen to you, you're going to fight with everything that you've got in you. And Bella doesn't really have that much injuries to herself. You would have expected bruises from the side of that stairwell on her sides, on her legs, injuries. And you don't really have those kind of injuries. You do have the kind of mechanical injuries from pushing someone through that narrow opening. But what about the kind of injuries you'd expect from someone fighting for their life, who's in a standing position, surrounded by, at close quarters, by these fairly sharp-edged, those metal railings look like they kind of rectangular. They don't look even circular, but they're narrow enough that if you fell hard against them, you would get bruised. And if you fell really hard against them, it could shave the skin off your arms or your knees or your legs or whatever. You'd expect stubbing of toes and chafing of elbows and all this kind of thing, and yet you don't see any of that. If you wanted to make the argument, so if you wanted to say, look, I really think that this did happen, what can you think of that would make it possible that this did happen? And the only thing that I can think of is, if you want to try to convince somebody that you didn't plan, that this was not premeditated, then this absurd story would certainly support that counter-narrative. In other words, wow, I was just driving to the well site. I didn't know what I was going to do there. I was just driving, and when I got there, Bella was there, and I don't know what happened, but the next thing, I killed her, and then I just put her in the tank. She was right there, and the tank was right next to her. And I apologize if this sounds flippant, but I'm just saying that's the only sensible thing that comes out of the senselessness, is a silly story about, I didn't know what I was going to do. And of course we know that Watts did know what he was going to do. We do know that it was premeditated. And that is what makes this whole Bella afterlife thing not make a lot of sense. I would still like to know, when Shanann asked Watts to send her photos of the children in bed, why didn't he do that? And on previous occasions when she'd asked for photos, he had sent her photos, so why not then? I mean, does that make sense? Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.